It's no secret that I've been trying to get Witchcrafters to work for a while now. But between Chaos Ruler getting banned, ruining 2 of my different builds, and also any attempts at building Spellbook Witchcrafters being, well, just kind of bad, it's been a rough time for the deck. But then Konami decided that they hate women slightly less than usual this month by releasing a set called Mama, or Magnificent Mavens, but they were definitely looking through the dictionary to find a word that started with MA just so they could call the set Mama. Anyway, this set is supposedly here to support women, I guess, by giving us support for Sky Strikers, Mayakashis, and Witchcrafters. Oh, and also everyone's favourite waifu, Keldo the Ancient Statue. Now, are the Witchcrafter cards better than a searchable kaiju in an already great deck, an incredibly powerful floodgate, or, you know, the new meta for the next few months? Well, no. To be honest, they were fairly stingy with the new support, despite this deck needing it a lot more than the others. But does that mean it's bad? No, the new fusion is pretty great actually. It has 3 effects, and you'll be using every one of them. You trigger them by either waiting for a spell to be activated, including your opponent's, or when any spellcaster activated its effects. So as you can guess, it's not too hard to trigger all 3 of them. The 3 effects you can choose between are the following. Either destroy any card on the field, which doesn't target by the way, or special summon any low-level Witchcrafter from your hand or deck, so anything other than a Ruru, Verch or Haina. Or finally, add a Witchcrafter spell or trap back from your graveyard to your hand, letting you discard it once again for other effects, or add something like a trap that you sent off of Shmieta's effect. On top of fairly good stats, this makes for a pretty good card, and basically sets up the entire Witchcrafter deck for you if you manage to summon it. But how do you summon it? Well, they got a new fusion spell too, Witchcrafter Confusion Confession. However, it's just polymerization with the usual Witchcrafter spell effect of adding itself back in the end phase. That sounds underwhelming and, well, honestly, it is. But you still run it just to have 3 more fusion spells, and something you can recycle with your new monster just to fuel Verch or Haina. It's useful to have more spells just to get the engine going. However, that's not how we'll be making this card. Instead, we'll be using Branded Fusion. Thanks to this, we basically get to use a Witchcrafter from the deck instead of needing both of them in the hand or field, and then the extra one can be any spellcaster, making the requirements a lot more lenient. This, of course, is thanks to Lubellion or Albion, letting you fuse a second time. Now, since this locks us out of non-fusion extra deck monsters, we can just embrace that. By adding a package of Nadir's Servant, now thankfully back at 3, we get even more spellcasters to use, who not only complement the deck's playstyle by adding to the board with no real downside, but also allow you to trigger Vice Madame on demand. Let's take a look at how it works. Here's the deck. Let's start with the Witchcrafters. Run 3 Shmieta, 3 Jenny and 2 Peter for the low levels, and then one of each Verch, Haina, Aruru and Adel. This is all fairly standard except for maybe Adel. I was trying her out with some other tech, with which she works fairly well, but also she's a light Witchcrafter that isn't Verch, so when you use Branded Fusion for Albion, you don't need to banish your 1 copy of Verch. You could also run 2 Verchs, I guess, but then you miss out on the extra versatility. After that, I opted to run 3 Aluba. You might think that this is too many normal summons, but the truth is you actually don't want to normal summon your Witchcrafters unless you really have to, as they're a lot more useful as fusion materials and discards for their graveyard effects. The extra searches of Branded Fusion and Aluba is definitely worth it, since that's your strongest card. To be able to run Branded Fusion, you do want your 1 copy of Albaz. You also want an Ecclesia and a Fleur de Lis, since that package works so well with branded decks, and them also being spellcasters is an even bigger bonus. Speaking of spellcasters, Effect Veil is a nice hand trap to run just for its synergy as a light spellcaster, and can often be used as a material for Vice Madame. Now for our Witchcrafter spells, I promise you do want to run quite a lot of them. Vice Madame loses a ton of her power if you don't have at least one of them in your starting hand, so you want it to be as likely as possible. That's why we're running 3 of the new fusion spell like I said in the intro, but also 3 Creation, Holiday, 1 Unveiling and 1 By Street. Run an extra unveiling if you don't want to run Adel, or later on if you cut Patronus. As usual, prioritise getting By Street in the graveyard with Shmieta, since the protection it offers is the most valuable to get in the end phase. Then we end our spells with 3 Branded Fusion and 3 Nadir Servant. They both offer a ton of power to the deck without ever really making you lose anything, and any hand starting with them is usually a good hand. And since they're spells, if you draw extra copies, they're just discard fodder for the Witchcrafters, so they're fine either way. We also run 2 traps, Dogmatica Punishment and Witchcrafter Patronus. Punishment is obviously just a nice interruption without much of a downside, and Patronus can recycle things banished by Lubellion's fusion requirement, or just by the little Witchcrafter's own effects. Patronus is pretty optional though, so feel free to run an extra Peter or an Unveiling. Now for the extra deck, it's mostly just used to turbo out Vice Madame, going through one of the Dragon Fusions. Because of this, we run 3 of her, mostly just for safety reasons, but also because we might actually be able to summon her multiple times thanks to Confusion recycling itself. Then run 1 of each Lubellion, Albion and Mirrorjade. Between Lubellion and Albion, the one you'll make depends on your hand and whether or not Lubellion's discard would be beneficial to you or not. Just remember that Albion banishes while Lubellion shuffles back, so make sure not to banish your only copy of something like Ver. Mirrorjade is obviously something else you can make pretty easily, so we run a copy of that for the situations where it could be more effective. Titanic Lad is your usual Nadir Servant target, getting you a punishment in the end phase and letting you search Ecclesia and Fleur. Then run 2 Intis, in case you use the first one for Nadir and the second one for punishment. We then have 2 spellcasters that you could technically summon, so we might as well run them too, even if it's not very likely. Other copies of the dragons work well too, in case you really don't want to bother with these. Wind Pegasus is another target to send, while the links are basically just spellcaster support that can help if you don't draw Branded Fusion. Artemis is an easy way to get a Witchcrafter in the graveyard while letting you summon Ecclesia if you happen to draw her. Finally, let's go over some options. Using Branded Fusion, you can easily access Jaugen by sending him by making an Albion, and then making Vice Madame with other monsters, and finally using her effect to summon Adel who can revive Jaugen. However, due to Jaugen stopping both players' special summons, you can't use Fleur de Lis, Aruru, or even Vice Madame's second effect, so due to the anti-synergy with the deck, I opted not to run it in the end. Mercurier is another option, since you'll often have an Albaz fusion sitting on the field. It's risky though, because if you don't draw the fusion or an Aluber, it won't do anything, so I opted against it. Finally, since the extra deck isn't used too much, it's very possible to run 3 Prosperity if you make room for it, to help draw Branded Fusion. Anyway, that's the deck, but now let's watch it in action. It's time to show off a few test hands. But before that, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed it so far. This first hand has both Aluber and Shmieta in it, but since we don't have Branded Fusion, Aluber search is more important. Once searched, use Branded Fusion to send Aluber and Hyena, making a Lubellion, who discards Shmieta to use her and Hyena for a Vice Madame. Now, when you use Creation to search Aruru, you also get to summon out a Shmieta as Vice Madame. Shmieta discards Creation to go into Ver, and you can immediately add the spell back to your hand. Now you can also send Hyena to the graveyard with Shmieta, reviving her as Holiday. You'll end with Ver's Negate, Hyena's Pop and Protection, enough spells for both of them thanks to Vice Madame who also pops a card, and then Aruru's Bounce, giving you a nice amount of interruptions. This time let's add Nadir Servant to the mix. Start with Aluber again, doing the same fusion line as last time, except using Jenny in your hand. As a side note, you should try and remember to summon one of your fusions in the EMZ, since you'll run into space issues otherwise. After searching Aruru while also getting a Shmieta, you can now use Nadir Servant to send Titanic Lad, getting you an Ecclesia. You can summon a Ver, and also search Punishment thanks to Ecclesia. Set your traps, and send By Street thanks to Shmieta to get its protection. You'll also search a Fleur de Lis in the end phase. You'll end with a bunch of interruptions, and also the possibility of even more if you happen to use your zones properly. Maybe even consider popping your own Aluber during your turn to make some room for Aruru and Fleur de Lis, to guarantee their bounce and negate. After all, that would make Aluba's Graveyard Effect live, which could be pretty useful in this deck. Here's a hand that won't do as fancy a combo as the others, but still ends on a nice board. We'll normal Schmierter to get Vert to start with, possibly baiting an Ash Blossom before the Branded Fusion. They'll make an Albion using an Effect Veil at this time, and then we just go straight into Mirror Jade. Now Schmierter sends By Street before we set a punishment and end our turn. We'll still be ending on a Blanket Negate, a Banish, a Double Destruction effect, and some protection, so don't forget that you don't always need to make Vice Madame with every single hand. Finally, let's show a hand with Confusion since I do run it at 3. Start with Creation to get a Jenny, and normal summon her. She'll discard Holiday to go into Vert, and then copy Creation to search Schmierter. Now you can use Confusion to summon a Vice Madame using Schmierter and Aruri. Schmierter's effect will let you add back Confusion while sending By Street, and Nadir will search an Ecclesia while using Vice Madame to get out an Adel. Adel then tributes herself to summon back Aruri, before Ecclesia summons herself to search Punishment. In the end phase, By Street and Holiday will trigger to recycle themselves, and Titaniclad also triggers to get you a Fleur de Lis. Now on your opponent's turn, Aruri will trigger to add herself back to the hand, ready to use her effect, which also triggers Vice Madame to get a Schmierter. That will let you get access to Heiner and her pop and targeting protection, recycling a card in the process, and then whenever you need to, you can also trigger Fleur de Lis to get both a negate and a pop, since being a spellcaster, she can also trigger Vice Madame's effect. All of this backed up by Punishment's Destruction effect, Verse Negate, a whole bunch of protection, and if you summoned a fusion in the extra monster zone, space for both Aruri's summon and bounce as well. And that's the deck. Will you be running the Branded engine with your Witchcrafters, or do you have another idea to try and get them to work? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Special thanks to my tier 3 patron, Distran. The link to that is in the description. Thanks for watching!